There you go. Hi. Hey, Seth. We're live.
Hi, Jivana. Sorry, I'm just pouring some tea here.
That's nice. How are you?
I'm doing very well. It's a rainy morning here in Calistoga. Is it raining down there in Santa Barbara?
Beautiful, beautiful sunny day.
Ah, okay. Well,
I don't talk to many people about our weather.
that's true. But it's also nice. We need the rain, so it's very nice. But it's lovely to be here with you today. So thanks for inviting me.
Thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I love talking to you. And we have a lot to talk about. And I always like to start with some kind of centering. Are you going to lead us through something, through a centering practice?
Sure. I had a feeling you would ask me that. And, for those of you who've seen me lecture or taking courses with me, you might know it's not typically how I teach online. But for Jivana and for accessible yoga, I thought that would be fun. And I think, something we're going to talk about maybe later today is, yoga philosophy and history, but particularly looking at this text. I don't know if you can see that, but it's the Hatha Pradipika or Hatha Yoga Pradipika. And so I felt inspired to take a practice from this 15th century yoga text. And it's one of these practices that everybody who does yoga knows, but you might not know where it comes from. And it's just a very simple breath practice, often termed Nadi Shodhana or Nadi Shuddhi, the purification of the nadis, the inner channels, through the breath. And there's various levels and layers to this practice, but we'll keep it pretty simple here. We're going to be breathing in through the left nostril. I'm not sure what you're seeing, but this is my left nostril. We'll breathe in. We'll gently hold that breath, and then we'll exhale out through the right. We'll then breathe in through the right, gently hold that breath, and breathe out through the left. The Pradipika calls this the solar and lunar channels. The left is the moon or the solar, and the right is the sun. So if you'd like, you can use your hands. You can adopt this particular hand gesture or mudra, sometimes referred to as Visnu Mudra, by bringing the index and middle finger down, and try to, if you can, keep this ring finger up. We use that on the left and the thumb on the right. But if that's too tricky, you can also just use your thumb and your index finger. Or if you don't want to touch your face, if you're trying to stay clear of COVID, you don't have to use your hands at all. And in fact, this is a more advanced and even subtle form of Nadi Shodhana, which is trying to direct the flow of prana or breath in and out of the alternate nostrils without utilizing the hands. So whatever you like, adopting a comfortable seated asana or posture. You can just keep the spine long, chest lifted and shoulders relaxed. And closing off the right nostril, we'll just gently inhale through the left. Closing off both nostrils, gently holding the breath. Exhaling through the right. Inhaling right. Holding the breath. Exhaling left. Inhaling left. Holding. Exhaling right. Inhale right. Hold. Left. And once more on your own, just at your own pace. Gently releasing and just taking a few inhalations and exhalations through both nostrils. And slowly returning. Hi, Jivana. Hi, everyone.
Thanks, Seth. That's awesome. That's probably my favorite practice in all of yoga. And one thing I love about that practice is when you mentioned the ability to do it just with the mind and without thinking, is that to me that's exactly where accessible yoga meets kind of what I think of as like advanced yoga, and how there's like a misunderstanding around that to me, around what accessible yoga is, and that it's such an accessible practice, but it's so subtle and so advanced too. So it's quite interesting, really, right? Because you don't need physical ability to do it. You don't have to even have use of your arms. You can do it just with the mind, but it's also quite subtle and powerful. So really intriguing. That aspect of how subtle is so powerful in yoga. And I think we've lost that a little bit in the contemporary yoga scene, I think. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And we can get fixated on the outer appearance, on the physicality. And that can be challenging too, and fun and healing and beautiful in its own way. But when we shift our awareness inward and we focus more on the breath and the shifting states of mind, and when we begin to notice the relationship between the breath and the mind, that's when things might become more advanced, but in a much more subtle way. That's actually, if we can go back to the text a little bit, because I always want to go back to the text. That's actually how the Pradipika introduces that practice, by drawing our attention to this powerful connection between the mind and the breath. And that's one of the, I think we've lost Jivana.
My system had a little glitch, but can you see me?
I can, and now you've swapped sides. You're now on my solar channel, and I'm on the lunar channel now. Hope that's okay.
Yeah, that's better. I prefer the lunar.
Wow, what a powerful siddhi from our pranayama. I've just swapped you over to the other channel.
Yeah.
I thought I would just share this verse, though, if that's okay. Might kind of lead us to some discussions. Can I read the Sanskrit? Is that okay?
Yeah, of course. I love it.
All right, this is Hatha Pradipika 2.2. Chale vate chalam chitam, nishchale nishchalam bhavet, yogi stanutvam apnoti, tato vayum nirodayet. Do you hear that word at the end? Nirodayet.
We know that word.
We know that word. What is being niroded here is the breath. The breath is being stilled and controlled. So the translation reads, when the breath is unsteady, when the breath is moving, chale vate, the mind is moving. The mind is unsteady. Chalam chitam. When the breath is steady, the mind is steady. And the yogi becomes steady. Yogi stanutvam. Therefore, tattaha, one should restrain or control or nirodha the breath. So when the mind is unsteady, when there's chitta vrittis and lots of activity, likewise the breath is unsteady and moving, and there's prana vrittis, you might say. And on the other side, when the mind is steady, the breath is steady. So there's this dyadic relationship between mind and breath, and this tug and pull. And so the yogi, recognizing that, tugs on the mind with the breath. And I always love that.
Accessible than the mind, right?
Exactly. Yeah, much harder to try to go straight to the chitta vrittis, to jump over the breath. A much more direct link between the physical and non-physical, you might say, the visible and invisible, this really important link of the breath. And this stuff goes all the way back. I mean, this text is the 15th century, but we find ruminations like that, back to the Upanishads, at least, over 2,000 years ago, about this connection between mind, breath, and body. That's really at the heart of yoga.
Exactly. Yeah, maybe you could go back a little bit. I didn't even really give you a chance to say anything about yourself, but I mean, your bio's in the thing, in the event, and I think everyone hopefully knows you, but can you just quickly maybe say what Yogic Studies is and about the course you're about to launch?
Sure. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Seth Powell. I'm a PhD student, really, at Harvard University, where I'm supposed to be writing a dissertation on medieval Hatha and Raja Yoga in South India, actually, from around the 14th, 15th century is what my project looks at. But I have a long history, how did I get to Harvard, and writing a dissertation and working on Sanskrit yoga texts like the Hatha Pradipika. I come from a long background of practice. I'm a former asana teacher. And really it was my experiences as a teacher and practitioner of yoga in California, in North America, that led me on this ever increasing and unending rabbit hole, searching for answers to, where did all this yoga come from, and what are these connections between these practices we're engaged in and the broader Indian traditions. And I spent a lot of time in India doing research, practicing, traveling. Led me to grad school, to the study of Sanskrit, to the PhD. And in 2018, after leaving Harvard, I came back to California with my family, my wife and kids. And like all of us, I needed to earn a living and find some income. As I left kind of my teaching stipend at Harvard on the table, a very meager teaching stipend as a graduate student, I needed to support my family. So people had suggested to me, why don't you try teaching an online course? Oh no, Jivana's disconnected.
No.
That's okay. I can just keep going though, if that happens.
And the problem I'm having is with my mic, actually. They're saying they can't hear me. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure what's happening. I was trying to change the mic and it changes my whole system. But
oh, that's weird. Yeah, I can hear you fine.
You just keep talking. That's what we're here for today. So
okay. So people had suggested that I start teaching online, and I really resisted it for quite a while. I didn't want to become like a public figure. I didn't want to put myself out there like that. But in some ways, I had no choice. I had to start teaching. And so I just, in January 2018, just experimented with this 6-week course, an introduction to the history and philosophy of yoga, what we called YS 101. And I don't know, I thought if I can get a couple people interested in this, that would be great. If I could get 10 people to sign up, then that would be worth my time. And I put it out there. I put poured everything I had into that course, all of my years and years of learning and training and study, and put that all into this compressed 6-week course that kind of takes us from the Vedas to modern postural yoga. And we had something like, I think 130 people or something like that signed up for the first course.
I remember, I think I was there.
I think you were in that first course.
Yeah.
Wow, now your mic is booming. I just had
now I'm booming.
And so it kind of steadily grew from there. And began sharing more online courses on yoga's vast history, Sanskrit yoga texts, yoga's philosophical traditions. And it quickly grew as interest grew in these topics and courses. I began adding other voices, other scholars, and other faculty to share their wisdom and expertise. And we now really have a fully fledged online school and educational platform that I think a yoga practitioner or a teacher or just anybody who's interested in Indian philosophy or these Indian traditions can now come to Yogic Studies and get a really high quality education online from anywhere in the world and have access to some of the top scholars, researchers, educators in this field of yoga studies. And it's really been an amazing thing to see grow. That's the classic Zoom, or I guess we're not a crowd count. And now it's been amazing just to see this community grow of people from all over the world. Many people, in the accessible yoga community, thanks to you, Jivana, who've taken our courses, and helped this thing grow. And so, it's been a really amazing thing to get to facilitate and host, and as a platform for me to teach and also for me to learn. I'm still a student and I get to learn also. I get to take these courses with Jim Mallinson and Finian Garrity and Ben Williams and, Daniela Bavalacqua. I've got some amazing teachers. So
it's amazing. And your new course, you're doing yourself on the Pradipika?
Yes. So our next course, which starts very soon, I think on Tuesday, what's that, May 19th, is going to be a text study course taught by myself on Svatmarama's Hatha Pradipika, or more commonly known as the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which is this text I held up. This is actually the translation that we will be using for this course by Brian Dana Akers, which is, I find, one of the more accessible translations of the text in English. It's just very clear and concise. It's not perfect, but Brian's done a very good job, I think. And it's going to be a 6-week course. We'll meet twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays, right around this time, 10:30 a.m. California PST. Everything's recorded, so if you can't make it live, you can always watch the recordings with all of our courses. But it's an opportunity to really dive deep into yoga philosophy, to a broader theoretical understanding of yoga, to yoga history, and to trying to understand, what was Hatha Yoga within pre-modern India before it began to transform into this globalized postural yoga thing. What did yoga look like in 15th century India? Who was doing this yoga? What did it comprise? What were the goals? And it's going to be an opportunity to really just read through the text slowly and carefully, really word for word, line for line. We'll start at the beginning. There's 4 chapters and just under 300 verses, and we'll make our way through the entire text.
Yeah,
and
it's a beautiful text. I mean, it's interesting because it really talks about specific asana, and I think that. Well, I guess it's much later than the other texts that most yoga students are reading. I mean, most people are reading the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and the Gita. And this is much later, but you do see actual asana in there, right? There's a few.
Yeah, much more asana than Patanjali, certainly more than the Gita. In the Hatha Pradipika, there are 15 asanas that are taught. Many of them are still seated postures, Siddhasana, Padmasana, but you also get some of the first non-seated or arm balancing asanas. both named after birds. You have Kukutasana, the rooster pose, and Mayurasana, the peacock. You also have every yogi's favorite posture taught in the Hatha Pradipika for the very first time. Do you know what posture?
Tree pose, is it?
Tree pose, no, is not in the Pradipika.
Oh, then headstand, maybe?
It's in the Gerunda Samhita.
Oh, okay.
No, what's the one pose that every yogi wants at the end of class, and if they don't get it, they feel like they've been ripped off? Shavasana.
Yeah.
Shavasana is taught for the first time in the Pradipika in the 15th century, and I think I'll have to double check. It is the last posture that's taught, which is interesting.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it, it's said to give to remove fatigue and give repose, to calm the body and the mind, which is not so far off actually from how it's used then in a class. So yeah, we'll look at asana, but we'll see really clearly, just like within Patanjali's yoga, also within the Pradipika, asana plays a role, but it's really not the most important role. It's not the fundamental or core practice of this system of Hatha Yoga. I would say it plays a more important role than what we see in Patanjali's Yoga Sutra.
Yeah.
I think in the sutras, as you know, and I'm sure many of your listeners know, it has a more specific meaning and focus, where it's really about developing a firm and comfortable seat, a sthira sukham asana, to enable one to move through the other angas or limbs of yoga, to be able to sit comfortably, to control the breath, to draw the senses in, to begin to still and concentrate the mind, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. So asana for Patanjali plays an important role. I think actually a more important role sometimes than people give a fair shake now, because it's easy to say, oh, Patanjali doesn't care about asana. But no, it's the third limb. Like and you don't get to the other limbs. It is the foundational seat that one establishes, and in which the other limbs can unfold. Yeah. But it's quite clear that asana does mean a seated posture for Patanjali. And so if we think of Patanjali, who probably lived and wrote this text around the 4th or 5th century of the Common Era, by the time we get to Svatmarama, the author of the Hatha Pradipika, in the 15th century, this is about 1,000 years later. I mean, imagine what has transpired in India in 1,000 years. Yeah. Can you even imagine what this world is going to look like in
1,000 years?
In 50 years, right? Of course, our rate of accelerated growth is different today, but 1,000 years is a really big period of time, and yoga went through some major transformations during that period. And by the time we get to the Pradipika, there's 15 asanas taught, but there's also an important shift, I would say, that has taken place, where asana is not only a seated posture for meditation, but asana also serves another role, which is to develop strength and vitality in the body, and also to purify the body. Similarly to what we just did with pranayama, asanas are taught to purify the nadis, or the doshas, ailments in the body, to awaken vital energy or life forces in the body. But also in the Pradipika, asana is still an important preliminary to pranayama. Right. So the pranayama chapter 2, begins with saying asane dridhe. So once you're firmly in an asana, then pranayama begins. And that's very parallel, or really echoes Patanjali, because the pranayama section for Patanjali basically says the same thing. Once the asana is established, then pranayama can unfold. So we'll get into all of that, in the course, and but we'll see how asana is this important and foundational practice, but it supports the other practices. And I would argue the more important practices really for the Pradipika, which are pranayama, mudras, bodily seals, not hand mudras, but actually different types of physical actions that are very similar to asanas, but have a more energetic function.
We do those in my tradition. We do body mudras, like yoga mudra. At the end of an asana series, full body, like sitting cross-legged, bending over, with the arms in different positions.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
In the Shivananda.
Integral yoga, yep. Similar, Shivananda, yeah.
Yeah, and I think one such mudra that people are quite familiar with, there's 10 mudras that are taught in the Pradipika. One of them is Viparita Karani, or the reversing action, which is probably a predecessor to shoulder stand or Sarvangasana. But then included in the 10 mudras are also the bandhas.
Right.
And so we'll see how those are taught. Jalandhara, Uddiyana, and Mula Bandha.
Right.
And I think it might shock people that they're not taught like within downward facing dog or within a vinyasa sequence. They're kind of their own thing. Yeah. And relate very much to prana and this kind of inner energetic work, really. Right. Which all of those are leading to really dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, very much like the sutras in that way. And all leading towards, what for the Pradipika is the final goal of liberation or samadhi. Yeah, it always seemed very aligned to the other, to the sutras, at least for me. It didn't feel like a separate conceptual idea. It was like practices that fit into that system pretty well. But I mean, he must have been aware of those systems already. I mean, from 1,000 years of practice. Yeah, it's something we'll definitely get into and address in the course. I think there's a lot of similarities in terms of structure and format of these practices. And as we just kind of outlined, these practices that are all leading towards a goal of samadhi. That's quite clear. And yet, what samadhi means for the Pradipika might be a little bit different than what samadhi means for Patanjali. And so that's something we'll give close attention to. Because I think when we look across these texts and traditions, on the one hand, they're similar in that the goal is some type of liberation or ultimate freedom from suffering, or the escape or release from samsara, or it's framed differently. But what does that actually entail, and the kind of metaphysics and ontology of what that means for a body and for a soul within that can actually look quite differently across texts. And I do think anybody who's studied the Yoga Sutras or Sankhya philosophy will know that the Yoga Sutra is really a dualistic philosophical text. Yeah. Asserting this difference between the Purusha and Prakriti, consciousness or spirit on the one hand and matter on the other. But by the time you get to the Pradipika, that view has in some ways been left behind within these texts and traditions. And there's really a more non-dual view that is brought in both, I would say, from Tantra and Vedanta. And so that's something we'll give close attention to. I think philosophically, the Pradipika is more aligned with non-dual Vedanta and Tantra, whereas Patanjali's Yoga Sutra and Sankhya philosophy is more of a dualistic metaphysics. That's something, I think we should pay close attention to. But the practices, the practices are also different. But there is continuity and similarity in those ways we've said, but also important differences. And that's just a reminder that, we can't just say that there's one yoga tradition and it all goes back to Patanjali or it all goes back to the Vedas or something. No, there really were different systems that were sometimes written down in different texts, systematized.
Yeah.
And there was quite a diversity of yogas, plural, pre-modern India.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's also different ways to approach yoga in terms of, like bhakti or karma yoga or, different types of practices that it does seem like those get lost these days. It seems like there is this kind of grouping everything together, like yoga history or philosophy as if it is a single thing, when it seems incredibly diverse to me. And I barely know, I barely understand it, but it does seem like there's so many. Also, I think maybe, is it because of there was a different technology back then, like things were shared in a different way. So it just feels like things must have grown more organically and locally, unlike today, where it's like everything is shared globally all the time.
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly in a very different cultural, civilizational moment, vastly different technologies and dissemination of knowledge. I mean, the internet is obviously, this incredible game changer where we can access all of these texts and ideas. For better or worse, we have this flood of information. But actually, that reminds me of the opening verses of the Pradipika, where Svatmarama, the author, in his own cultural and historically specific moment, is also kind of addressing this flood of information and misinformation. Let me just read this opening verse, and then we can chat about it. Because in some ways, it kind of really rings true even today in this very different moment. Well, there's a couple of verses that are really nice in the beginning. I won't read them all, but basically Svatmarama opens the text by saying he's going to teach this Hatha Vidya, this knowledge of Hatha Yoga, for the purpose of Raja Yoga. And he makes a very important statement right at the outset, the very beginning of the text. Lest people be confused, this Hatha Yoga is not completely separate from Raja Yoga, but rather is a vehicle. He actually calls it the stairway for the aspirant to reach the lofty peak, Pranayama Raja Yogam, the lofty peak of Raja Yoga. And then he says in 1.3, the third verse, Brahantya bahumata dvante Raja Yogam ajanatam Hatha Pradipikam dhate Svatmaramaha kripakaraha. If you heard that in there, Hatha Pradipikam, that's actually where we get the title for the text. He tells us. And that's why you'll hear me referring to this text as the Hatha Pradipika rather than the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, because Svatmarama tells us the title of the text himself. And so I think we should take it from him. But he obviously means Hatha Yoga when he says Hatha. It's just for metrical reasons he couldn't put the whole Hatha Yoga in there. But anyway, so that verse says the following: for those who are ignorant of Raja Yoga, ajanatam, those who don't know Raja Yoga, and who are wandering in the darkness of too many opinions, Bhrantya bahumata dvante, wandering in the darkness of too many opinions. The compassionate Svatmaramaha kripakaraha, he gives the light, the lamp, the Pradipika on Hatha Yoga. So it's this very nice verse using a comparison or a simile, where the darkness is the ignorance for those who don't know kind of the ultimate state or goal of Raja Yoga, which is samadhi. due to this darkness of too many opinions.
Yeah.
Well, Swaparama, out of his compassion, is going to shine this great light, this torch, illuminate through Hatha Yoga. Hatha Yoga is then the light that can illuminate this darkness. So
it's like he's on Facebook. Yeah.
It's like he's like on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and he's, looking at the Wikipedia page for yoga, and he's like, what is going on? There's this darkness swamp of too many opinions. There's a lot of confusion. And so he's going to try to clarify, and he's going to try to kind of assert what is the system and what is the place of Hatha Yoga within this vast terrain and landscape of yoga. And as we will explore more in the text and in the course, there is in the background, it's very important to just be aware of, like, there are other competing systems of yoga in the 15th century.
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually a lot of critics of Hatha Yoga at this time. Mm-hmm. People who are saying and writing in texts, Hatha Yoga is purely physical. Those Hatha yogis are too concerned with the body.
Right.
And they're only concerned with siddhis or accumulating power. They're bhogis, not yogis.
Bhogis.
So Swaparama is trying to set the record straight here a little bit and kind of give some respect, put some respect on Hatha Yoga.
Doesn't bhoga mean like fun or something? Bhoga?
It can mean fun. It can mean indulgence.
Okay. That's the pun you were making. Okay.
And so sometimes there's this differentiation between bhogas and yogis, or bubukshus and mumukshus, those who are desiring bhoga, as you said, fun or enjoyment, pleasure really in the world, and those desiring moksha, or liberation.
But that opening that you read reminds me of the sutras, since ignorance is offered right away in the second chapter of the sutras as the main obstacle, to our enlightenment. And one other thought I had was that in Iyengar's translation of the sutras, he says that too, about that Hatha Yoga is just done to climb the ladder of Raja Yoga. I think he must have taken it from there. He must have taken the analogy right from this text, actually. It's interesting that he put that in his, or is it maybe it's in his Light on Yoga, but.
Yeah, I remember the quote too. And I think, surely he must have had the Hatha Pradipika in mind. It's a very distinct phrase that's used in the text there.
There's a question from Patrice. She says, does the Hatha Pradipika talk about karma yoga, bhakti yoga as separate practices?
Well, hi, Priya. Thanks for the question. No, the Pradipika does not talk about karma yoga or bhakti yoga. It's actually might be surprising to people today, because it's often taught this way, that there are these 4 yogas or 3 yogas, karma, bhakti, jnana, and sometimes Raja Yoga. That system or categories of different yogas really comes out of the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita. Although Raja Yoga is not taught in the Gita, but the first 3, karma, jnana, and bhakti. And it's really out of the commentaries of the Gita by these Vedantin theologians, really, who began to systematize this idea of these 3-fold yogas. Because the Gita, if you read the Gita closely, it doesn't exactly spell it out, like, okay, there's these 3 yogas, and here's the sequence, and da-da-da. It's a little bit more hodgepodge, I would say, in the Gita, and we can say, okay, here's the teachings on karma yoga, and here's the teachings on bhakti yoga, but it doesn't always spell it out so clearly in the text. It's really in the commentaries where these people who are systematizing these teachings really made those divisions more clearly. But beyond the Gita and its commentarial tradition, it's not as common as we might think, that classification of yogas.
Yeah.
Not to burst any bubbles, or I hope it's not too disappointing. I think it's still a useful framework, but it's really more of a useful framework for thinking about the yogas of the Gita, and not so much some of the other yoga texts and systems that don't emphasize that. Now, that said, the text that actually I'm working on for my dissertation is called the Shiva Yoga Pradipika. It's another lamp on yoga, this time on Shiva's yoga. And although it doesn't use the phrase bhakti yoga, it really is in many ways a bhakti yoga, hatha yoga text. And the author of this text is kind of taking these teachings and practices of hatha and raja yoga, but then understanding them within a bhakti and devotional framework. In this case, oriented towards Shiva. It's the Shiva Yoga Pradipika.
When is that from? Is that the same time period?
It's really the very same time period as the Hatha Pradipika. It's still unclear in my mind which came first. I think we're tempted to think it post-dates, that it came after Svatmarama, because Svatmarama doesn't quote from it. You see, one of the unique things about this text, actually...
Right. He quotes lots of people, right? Like 30, or he names great teachers. Is that what he does?
He does give a list of great teachers or siddhas. And it's a very interesting list, actually, of creating this sort of genealogy of Hatha yogis. But no, what we've really found, scholars who are working very closely on this text have found that a lot of the verses in the Hatha Pradipika are actually sort of copy and paste jobs from earlier texts. And it's like a compilation. I call it Svatmarama's greatest hits. Now, they're not all cut and paste, or at least we haven't found antecedents of all the verses. It does seem like he's composing a lot himself as well. But in this way, it's an incredibly useful text, because he was kind of bringing together that which was before and synthesizing it anew. And actually, the same thing can be said about the Yoga Sutras. I think, as you know, Jivana, that Patanjali was really weaving together, what had come before. And, some of the sutras, I'm sure, were his own writing, but a lot of them were probably coming from other places, and he was weaving this whole thing together. And so it's more common than we would think. And the whole idea of authorship, Jivana, you just wrote this book, what goes into that, but can you imagine if we didn't put your name on it?
I know.
Or if we could have you could have just offered that, and you could have said this was done by Vyasa.
Right.
You would have invoked, or maybe your guru, maybe we put the guru's name on it.
I mean, that actually what I think the guru lineage would have taught me to do, actually. I mean, to say, these teachings came from my teacher, and to acknowledge that person and give them credit. So I always wonder about that. I know that it's a challenge in the history of yoga.
Yeah, and there's a different understanding of plagiarism. Today, if you cut a bunch of stuff from some other yoga book and you put it in yours, and you didn't quote them and you didn't put a footnote, that would be illegal. But for Svatmarama in that time, in that textual tradition, it's actually a sign of respect and honor to quote from an earlier text. So it's unfortunate for us that he doesn't say, oh, this is from the Dattatreya Yoga Shastra. But we can now start to see that more and more as more of these earlier texts and manuscripts are coming to light. We can see which ones, he was quoting from. And that's really helpful for us in dating these earlier texts. We can use the Hatha Pradipika as this sort of Rosetta Stone to kind of see which ones are prior to that.
Can I ask you, we don't have a lot of time, and I wanted to just hear your thoughts around the general subject around kind of the accessibility we had talked about of these texts, and the way, and maybe just some general thoughts around the way current practitioners are accessing them or not, and how what you found now that you've been doing this for a while, kind of about the state of our knowledge or understanding as yoga teachers in general. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So do you want me to talk about the history of who had access, or do you want
I'm curious what you think about contemporary teachers now, and kind of, not to criticize, but just like your thoughts about how much we should be aware of and how little we seem to know is what I guess it's what I'm guessing you would say, is that it doesn't seem like there's a lot of clarity in that's offered through teacher training programs around yoga history and philosophy. It seems like it's a big mishmash of stuff. And I would just say, the reason I mention it is because I feel like you've done something that's incredibly important, which is you created like a very accessible way of learning about these important things that in the past felt hard to understand or hard to access, actually.
Well, thanks for saying that. So yeah, I think there's a number of different things I could say about that, and I don't want to point fingers or criticize. I think everybody's doing the best they can. In some cases, though, perhaps we could do slightly better. And I'm just speaking broadly about yoga teacher training industry.
Yeah.
I think there's always exceptions to this, and really unique programs who are going above and beyond the basic standards, perhaps, that are set, and bringing in outside experts. I think it's sort of a mistake to think that the lead trainer or the one yoga teacher is supposed to know everything about yoga philosophy, history, Sanskrit, anatomy, safety, alignment, all of these things, how to create a website, marketing. Like, that's sort of ridiculous.
Yeah.
So I think we should be thinking about we should be very humble about the limitations of our own expertise and our own knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
I think if I'm speaking to studio owners or, training program leaders, like I would just encourage them to be honest about, what are you really good at, and what is your offering here? And if possible, to be bringing in others to, specialize. A lot of programs do that already. There is still this question about, accessibility to these texts and to these knowledge systems. And they're not easy. And, I've been studying this stuff for a long time, and I constantly feel like a beginner. Right. Every time I pick up a text like the Pradipika again for the first time after a few years, I sort of feel like I'm reading it again for the first time almost. Yeah. I really mean that, because our understanding of these traditions is constantly improving and unfolding. Yeah. So I think we should be humble about the limitations of our knowledge, but I also think we should be hungry and curious to learn more. And I do think it's really important, especially for teachers, who, for better or worse, are sort of public representations of of these vast and ancient traditions today. Even though the transmission histories are very complex and messy and not linear, yoga teachers, yoga professionals today are sort of representatives of this broad thing called yoga. And I think we should be very respectful about where this comes from, and that we should try our best to educate ourselves about yoga in India and the history of yoga, and try to read some of the texts. I don't think that we need to look at the texts for justification necessarily all the time for what it is that we're doing today. I don't think just because something's in a text or not, that what we're doing today is authentic or not. But I think we should be really humble and real about that relationship. So that's, in many ways, what I've seen my role with Yogic Studies is to try to invite people in to kind of enter into a text or enter into this world of yoga's past and try to just get more clear and transparent about what yoga was, the depth and vastness of it, and to become more clear about kind of what we're doing today and how that relates to it or not. And I think that's okay. We don't have to dismiss everything today because it's not written in the Pradipika. Right. But I think we should be honest about certain innovations, and we should be honest about certain adaptations that are being made to the practice. It doesn't help anybody to say, take downward dog, for 10 breaths because it's written in the Vedas. It does not serve anybody to say, do this practice because yogis have been doing this for 10,000 years and therefore it's going to heal your sacrum.
Right. Well, that's where, especially the claims are really concerning, when they may not be true. So, I think there are things we could say, like, it's fun. Like, I often quote you actually when I'm teaching, accessible yoga and even talking about using a yoga strap. And I quote that research you did about the yoga strap being, used in sculptures from 2,000 years ago. And I think that's a really important thing to show people, like, that there is a history here. And I think there are ways to connect back to history that are powerful, but yeah, just to make claims that are unfounded is so dangerous. And also, it just makes us all look bad.
Yeah. So it's a part of, cultural appreciation and respect, and also just a part of being honest with ourselves and with these traditions. And especially if you're in a position of teaching, disseminating knowledge and practices, I think it behooves everyone in any profession and in any industry to educate yourselves about that particular discipline, that tradition, and to give reliable information to your students. And if you don't know an answer, I think you can say that. I think that's okay. I think sometimes yoga teachers are put on this weird pedestal of having to know everything. And actually, I think it humanizes the practice and yoga teachers to say, I'm not sure. That's a really good question. I'm going to look that up and I'll see if we can get back to that, and then go take a course with Yogic Studies and study for 10 years and go do a PhD and then come back and say, I don't know. I still don't know.
Exactly. Well, no, it's really important because that's actually ethical. That's how you teach in an ethical way. And it's part of, there are new, Yoga Alliance has released some new code of conduct, new scope of practice, which actually create guidelines for that, which amazingly that didn't exist before. Like, there was no scope of practice for yoga teachers. So I think hopefully we're moving in a direction where we can teach and represent yoga in a more ethical way. Because I actually have a lot of concerns about that in general. Maybe that's not for you to resolve, but it does seem that there's a lot of harm done in the name of yoga. A lot of abuse has happened and people getting hurt. So I feel like we have some ways to go as a community in addressing these issues. And this is a really core one. How do we represent our knowledge in an ethical and honest way?
Yeah, I think that's really important. The other side, I'd just like to say of, I think, why it's important to do this kind of continued education is I do think we need to continue to deflate the asana thing. I think asana is beautiful and an amazing practice, and we have taken asana to new heights, really, that it never had reached in pre-modern India.
Yeah.
And there's a whole global discourse in history about how and why that's happened.
Yeah.
And I think it's continuing to grow in new ways as asana, mixes with other technologies and other paradigms and, Western biomedicine and science and all sorts of things and biomechanics. And so asana is great. I never am ragging on asana, but we've gotten to this point today where asana is synonymous with yoga. And I think that is not only problematic, from a historical perspective, it's very misleading, it's very misrepresentative. But beyond that, you're just missing out. You're missing out on so much of what yoga has been and can be. And so anytime I'm teaching, really, I feel like that's something that comes up because we're often coming into a class or we're coming into a study session with a preconceived notion of yoga as postural practice. And really nowhere in my studies of any of this do you see that kind of equation where the practice of asana means yoga. Asana can be an aid or a particular discipline or method of yoga, but nowhere is asana given that kind of central primacy as we see today. And so I think the study of these texts really quickly reveals that and opens up then just these whole other aspects of the yoga traditions that for the texts are more important and are more core and more transformative, actually.
And more accessible, to be honest. I mean,
in some cases more accessible.
Because generally they're more like, oftentimes they're more universal in their themes, and they're not based on physical ability. So I feel like that's often what I start out with when I teach the same exact thing, saying that, you know, we've misconstrued yoga in a sense to be this physical practice, which is by default, advanced means you're physically able to do things. And that's not really what yoga is all about. There's so much more to it that everyone can experience if we find a way in. Yeah. So, but I want to finish up, because I don't want to take too much of your time, but I wanted to ask you about your podcast. Can you say anything about that? I'm excited that you're launching it.
Yes, very exciting. Today's Wednesday, so I think we launched on Monday. I put out the first episode and a little introduction trailer. It's called the Yogic Studies podcast, and I'm really excited about this, Jivana. You know, I've told you before, it's something that I've wanted to do for a really long time, but honestly, I just didn't want to take on this whole new project, and I was daunted by the technology and the editing and all of that. But something about this pandemic and, you know, this new reality we're all in of quarantine and physical distancing, where all of a sudden these video and audio conversations are sort of more important and more potent than ever. And I really just felt like, okay, now is the time to move forward with this, and wanting to offer this to the broader yoga community, to the world, really. And so, you know, what this podcast is going to be is conversations and interviews that I'll hold with, you know, really leading experts and world-renowned scholars in the fields of yoga, religious studies, Indology, South Asian studies, and we'll touch on all things yoga. And I'm really excited to have these conversations with just really some incredible people from all over the world, and to kind of invite people in to those conversations in a very intimate way, you know, in a way that in some ways I feel like only a podcast can do. And we're going to geek out. We're going to really get our yoga nerd on. We're going to go very deep into the weeds. You know, some of this stuff is going to go way over people's heads for sure. Yeah. I'm going to try to do my best to kind of bring us back down to earth. And, you know, as always, I try to kind of find a sweet spot between, you know, the academic expertise of zooming in really deeply on a particular subject, and then being able to zoom out and what's kind of the bigger picture and why does this matter, and trying to find this balance between, you know, the academic research and the broader yoga community and practitioners. So if I'm successful, if that works, it'll be of interest to both scholars and researchers, but also importantly, yoga teachers and practitioners.
Yeah. I mean, you're great at that. I think that's your strength, is to translating this esoteric information into kind of everyday language. I've always enjoyed that about your teaching, and I feel like that's what Yoga Studies is offering all of us. So I'm excited for the podcast. Seems like just more of a good thing. So,
well, thank you. Yeah, I hope so. So yeah, folks can check that out. Right now it's on our website, but soon it'll be on iTunes. It's on Spotify right now.
Yeah.
But it'll be anywhere you get your podcasts, you should be able to find it soon, the Yogic Studies podcast. I also wanted to say, if I can, here at the end, for anybody who's interested, if any of this has piqued your interest and you'd like to study the Hatha Pradipika with me, maybe you've had this sitting on your shelf from a teacher training, or you've always wanted to read it and you haven't really made the time. This course is going to be the perfect opportunity to do that, and with a great group and community of students from around the world. So if anybody wants to join for this course, it starts next Tuesday, May 19th. And if it's okay, Jivana, I'd love to provide a promo code to your listeners, which I've just aptly named Jivana 15. And so you can get 15% off the tuition for that course if you type in all caps Jivana 15.
That's funny. We can put it in the comment section for the video as well on Facebook once we're finished. Thanks. And maybe with a link for where they sign up.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you can go to yogicstudies.com and click on courses and find it there, but we can put the link as well.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I could talk to you for hours, which we sometimes do, but I don't want to take too much of your time.
Are there any other questions? Maybe could we take another question?
The only other thing was just to thank us, and Kat mentioned the T-shirt we had made. Going back to the conversation we're having about asana, Accessible Yoga made a T-shirt. Outer ability does not equal inner peace. That was one of our slogans for a while. The best shirt ever. Otherwise, people are thanking us, thanking you. And Melanie put in the promo code already.
Nice.
Someone said, spot on. That's Alexis. I will sign up and listen to the podcast as well. Thanks, Jivana and Seth. So, and Priya again mentioned that Seth did the Zoom in, Zoom out just recently, Jim Allison's course. I'm not sure what, Jim Allison, you finished a course with him recently.
Yeah, we just did the Roots of Hatha Yoga, which was a 4-week course with Dr. Jim Allison from SOAS, from the University of London, who's, for those who don't know, aren't familiar with his work, I mean, really the leading scholar of these texts and traditions, and really one of my academic mentors. And it was an amazing course and great opportunity to get to learn from Jim and to hear a lot of his unpublished work and ideas. He's at the end of this 5-year Hatha Yoga project, and so he's now kind of writing everything up into the book. And he sort of shared with us some of the stuff that's going to go into the book that he hasn't kind of made public yet, and it's pretty exciting. There's some new theories about that in some ways relates to these conversations about who was writing these texts, who were these practitioners. And so if anybody's interested, we'll look out for his book for sure. But that course is also available. You can, all the materials are all recorded, and you can take it as a self-study course.
So all your previous courses are available. Like you have your course on the Yoga Sutras, a course on the Gita, a Sanskrit course. That's just starting now, is that right?
We have a couple Sanskrit courses that I've taught that are available for self-study, but we also have a new, really like a 1-year program for people who really want to actually learn Sanskrit, to be able to read these texts in their original language. It's a trilogy of courses, a 3-part series with Dr. Antonia Rupel, who's an amazing Sanskrit teacher. She actually wrote this new book called The Cambridge Introduction to Sanskrit, which will be the textbook that we use. So yeah, all of those courses, really this whole curriculum is available on yogicstudies.com. And we've now also, we're now offering what I call the Advanced Certificate Program, which is really it's a 500-hour program, although honestly it's going to be way more than 500 hours, but a larger framework, for study for people who really want to kind of go through, a lot of these courses in a more formal way, with kind of a community, and to have a graduate seminar, to do like a research project of their own at the end of it.
Wow.
So a really, really dynamic program. Really, I mean, I look at it like a graduate program for yogis online. Yeah.
Melanie's asking, will the discount code work just for the Pradipika course, or is that?
It is. That code is set up. It's just for this Pradipika course. But if you're having financial hardship or anything right now, especially you're a yoga teacher, might have lost your income, shoot me an email, info@yogicstudies.com, and maybe we can help you out.
Okay, that's great. All right. Anything else you want to share with us?
I think that's it for now. I got to get home and relieve Charlotte, my wife, of her duties and get back to the kids. And but this was really fun. Jivana, yeah, we could keep going for hours doing this. I feel like.
I love talking to you. Thank you.
Likewise. Yeah. Thanks for all your great work, in creating this community and making all of this more accessible.
Great. Thank you. All right. Take care.
All right, Jivana, we'll be in touch.
All right. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.